The home where I spent my childhood sat right beside a bustling set of train tracks. Peering out from my bedroom window, I could observe trains passing by regularly. There were 3 distinct types of trains that frequented those tracks, and they continue to do so to this very day. First, there were the lengthy freight trains hauling boxcars, flatbeds, and tankers, their rhythmic clattering prompting me to try and count each passing car. Then came the swift commuter trains of the Metropolitan Area Transit Authority, also known as MATA, or simply the M by some. Alongside them, Amtrak passenger trains breezed past, journeying to and from the central station nestled in the heart of the city. While most people saw trains as colossal machines traversing ribbons of steel, I perceived them as symbols of freedom and an escape from the neighborhood. Each passing train fueled my imagination, conjuring images of the diverse places it traversed. In my younger years, my cherished toys were my Thomas the Tank Engine collection, featuring characters like Thomas, Percy, Gordon, James, Toby, Daisy, and more. When I turned 10, my grandparents gifted me a Lionel train set for my birthday, a present that ranked as the best in my eyes. The set included a steam engine and 4 passenger cars, complete with a tiny bottle of drops for the smokestack, creating the illusion of real smoke. I'd lose myself for hours, captivated by the toy train's circuitous route, pretending it journeyed through forests, across fields, over mountains, and past quaint towns. Despite developing other interests, particularly in girls, my fascination with trains persisted. As I grew older, I applied for a position as an engineer trainee at MATA, and I got it. It was a dream realized. Following the required classroom courses and exams, I found myself riding in the cab of the sleek diesel engines that pulled the commuter trains. The trainee program was structured to have us ride on various lines of the system for a few months, accompanying experienced engineers. I'd spend weeks on one line before being assigned to another, gaining familiarity with different routes. The M boasted 8 routes, all numbered, with the main line designated as Line 1 and the branch lines as Line 2, Line 3, and so forth. My initial assignment was on Line 7, but I soon transitioned to Line 8. Line 8, known as the Cloverton Line, was one of the system's lengthiest branch lines, second only to Line 2, also known as the Millersport Line. On my first ride along Line 8, I partnered with a seasoned engineer named Walter. Walter had been with the company since its inception, back when the old railroads relinquished their money-losing commuter services, handing over their locomotives and rolling stock to MATA. Our journey commenced with the night owl service, starting at 7 p.m. and concluding at 5 in the morning. We picked up our initial passengers at Central Station and embarked on our route to Cloverton. Walter looked at me solemnly and began, "It supposedly started with a curse. Back in the late 1800s, one of the old railroad companies constructed the line across the edge of an old farm owned by a man named Ezra Gray without his permission. Ezra demanded the railroad remove the tracks from his property and lay them somewhere else. However, the railroad refused, citing the considerable time and cost it would incur. Mr. Gray attempted to sue the railroad but was unsuccessful. In those days, railroads held significant power, with many politicians and judges in their favor. To make matters worse, not only did Ezra have to cover the court costs, but he also had to pay the railroad for all the expenses incurred during the legal proceedings. This financial strain forced Ezra to sell the farm, except for the small patch of land the tracks were built on. In his despair, Ezra Gray vowed to seek revenge in some way. Walter continued. When the line eventually opened, Ezra stood on the tracks in front of the first train. The engineer tried to stop, but Ezra was hit nonetheless. Before he succumbed to his injuries, Ezra cursed the line, foretelling of death and sorrow. Since that fateful day, numerous mishaps and accidents occurred on these tracks, claiming many lives. It is believed that some of those who perished haunt various spots along the route, and a few of the trains involved in past crashes return as ghost trains, still rolling along these very rails we're on now. I gazed at Walter as he blew the horn for another crossing and inquired, "Have you seen any ghosts on this line?" "Plenty," he replied. "I've seen everything from headless trainmen to phantom lights and ghost trains." Skeptical, I didn't voice my doubts. As we approached a curve in the track, my blood ran cold. Emerging from the curve, I spotted something that sent a chill down my spine, a headlight of another train heading straight for us. "Walter, for God's sake, put the brakes on!" I yelled. "Don't you see the other train coming our way?" Walter calmly responded, "Yeah, I see it. Don't worry, we'll be fine." I looked at him in disbelief and screamed, "Are you crazy? We're about to die." Walter pointed straight ahead and assured, "No, we're not. Get a good look at that train." I did, and to my amazement, the oncoming engine not only resembled the older type diesels from photos and films of the 50s and 60s, but it also appeared as a transparent shadow with a headlight and illuminated cab windows. "What the—" I began to say, but then that shadow train collided with us. Well, not exactly collided, more like passed through us. Our entire cab was enveloped in shadows and streaks of light as what appeared to be a passenger train passed through. I swear I saw pale, wispy figures of people sitting in the seats. Soon it vanished, and the cab of our engine returned to normal. "What the hell was that?" I exclaimed. Walter turned to me and explained, "That was one of the ghost trains I was talking about." "Well, what's the story with that ghost train?" I asked. Walter sighed and shared, "It all happened shortly after MATA took over the commuter rail lines. An evening inbound train had just crested the long grade we're on right now when it lost control, careening downhill before crashing and piling up on the curve at the bottom. Everyone on board was killed, and the cause of the wreck was attributed to the aging equipment MATA was using back then. Most of the engines, with a few exceptions, were 25 to 30 years old, and about 30% of the coaches used were even older. Not long after, the ghost of that train started making appearances along this stretch of track, becoming one of several ghost trains that haunt these rails." I glanced at him, then out the front window of the engine. "What about the people back in the cars? Do you think they just saw what we saw?" I asked. Walter simply shrugged and replied, "Probably, but I'm sure most of them are used to it, so I wouldn't worry too much. Our conductor is probably taking care of things right now." We continued our journey to Cloverton and arrived on time. Throughout the night, we made runs back and forth, and several times I witnessed the eerie phenomena that Walter had described. Relief washed over me when we finally parked the coaches on a sidetrack and stored the engine in the roundhouse. The next few nights, however, were challenging. Every night run brought a handful of creepy encounters along Line 8, all with Walter, who nonchalantly shrugged them off as if they were nothing. After nearly 40 years, it seemed the ghosts no longer bothered him. After a few days, I was assigned to day runs, which was a relief, sparing me from witnessing ghost trains or encountering headless trainmen. Eventually, I became a regular engineer and was assigned to the main line run. I found contentment in my new role, but I made a silent promise to myself. If the higher-ups at the M ever decided to put me on the Line 8 night owl service, I would quit.